Hello, my name is Elizabeth Coleman, and I'm so happy to be here with you, though obviously I would so much rather be with you in person for this workshop, Poetry is a Call for Hope, Action, and Environmental Justice, based on the anthology I edited a year ago for Copper Canyon Press called Here, Poems for the Planet. I'm particularly sad that I don't get to be here with my amazing other workshop participants and really remarkably exciting poets, Kyle Dargan, Paul Guest, and Shara McCallum. But I'm happy to report that I'm going to be giving you some of their poetry today, and actually two of them are going to be giving you their own poetry today. So I'm going to raise some questions that we were going to discuss in the workshop about how to think about echo poetry. And then we're going to turn it over to readings. And one of the only advantages, well, a couple of advantages of this format. One is that obviously people can participate who wouldn't otherwise be able to participate. And secondly, we have a few more readers who can participate virtually. So I feel really good about that. And we're going to try to give you, what we would have given you there, though obviously we can't have the give and take, and you can't hear the brilliance of these other voices and of yourselves speaking back and sharing with us and reading with us. And we will be giving you our prompt at the end. Oh, and by the way, this session is being recorded. It's being recorded. But we also are, as you can see, we're providing subtitles. So thank you so much for joining us and giving you some of our day, and I hope we make it worthwhile. So I want to tell you, well, first of all, happy 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which, as you know, was at the end of April. And this book came out on Earth Day 2019. So it's a year old. It's Here's first anniversary too. And Here came to me as an idea in November of 2016. There was, you will recall, there was a pretty startling election with startling results. And I made a decision. I was doing voter election protection work in Ohio, and I was just trying to decide whether to cry for 4 years or just like people around me were crying. And at one point I decided to choose fury and action. And this book came out of that. And so I have a background. I am a poet. I have several books, and I'm also I have a background as a public interest attorney. As a poverty lawyer is sort of my deepest public interest background. I practiced law for over 30 years, and the thing I feel the most passionate about are poverty law and individual rights. But then I'm also an environmental activist and a mindfulness teacher. And over the years, I came to think that you can't have justice, which is really one of the things I live for is justice. You can't have it without a livable world. And it's sort of obvious, but it just sort of seemed so obvious, and it feels, and also we're not giving due to the animals and to marginalized communities, to communities of color, the people who bear the brunt of climate change. That is like the deepest injustice. And we see it with COVID-19. We see with COVID-19 that people who are bearing the brunt of COVID-19 are people in poor communities, people of color, people where the air wasn't good in the first place. There are more and more studies showing that that is a real problem. And so there's this connection between the reason we're not together today and climate change. I mean, there are a couple of connections. One is that, as I'm sure you know, as the climate warms, as humans and animals have less of a barrier, as we take away some of their natural habitat, there's more of this opportunity for these epidemics to jump species, and also for things to spread. There's a connection with that and the forced migration that occurs with climate change. It's a very serious thing. And one of the things that worries me now is the extent to which people are using this as an opportunity to cut back on climate change, addressing issues, and on climate justice, which is so deeply, deeply wrongheaded. And in fact, I think what COVID-19 in a way shows us is that even though the response of the world is belated, and even though this happened so quickly, when people see what can happen, many people will actually want to take change. And we see climate change endangering us over a longer horizon, and people aren't seeing the devastating results. But I think that if we could connect those two, it would be very profound. And so we need to really understand these connections and do more, not less. And as you know, we already are seeing the huge effects of climate change, particularly in countries that have less means, particularly marginalized communities. You know, as we see, there is accelerating sea level rise and longer, more harmful wildfire seasons, and more common and serious heat waves and more rainfall and flooding, and numerous impacts on human health, all of them affecting marginalized communities. But in the end, we're all affected. And there's no island that wealthy people can escape to where they will escape this. And it's just, we're all in this together, just as we're all in the end in COVID-19 together. And we must limit post-industrial temperatures to 1.5 Celsius. And we've got to do everything we can to do that. And we need an ambitious national plan to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy and reduce energy. And we have got, as a country, to do our part. And we, as poets and advocates, I think, need to do what we can. So that's what here is. So here is a call for hope and inspiration. I connect poetry to change, and it's got to be connected, as you know, in a subtle way, because poetry is not propaganda. Poetry is not screed. Poetry speaks from one heart to another, just as facts speak from one mind to another. And poetry can speak to our hearts, and I think can inspire us and give us hope in a very profound way. And hope can give us courage to act. And so I connect all these things too. There's a lovely Harvard Business Law Review article I found saying, hope is a strategy sword. And I think that what I have found is there's sort of maybe I'm feeling it a little less now with COVID-19, but sort of a cynicism. We feel like we just don't want to deal, and we just want to bury our heads. And I think that's from despair. Like, what can I do anyway? What can I do to affect the world? And so we want to sort of reach into people's hearts and help them care and help them feel that they can do something. So what I did was I put together 128 poems, each from a different poet, from all over the world, from all groups. I tried to be sure and include poems from countries where the brunt of climate change is being felt the worst, from some of the Caribbean countries, from Bangladesh, for example. I just made sure that it's voices from all over the world and voices from every socioeconomic group. So it's poems from all over the world, poems from all sorts of people, 1/5 of them under age 18, because I also, as we've seen with the brilliant work of Greta Thunberg, that young people are really taking this issue on. And so, and that actually, before that happened, I thought we need to have the voices of young people. And all the poets were living when their poems were chosen. Some of the poets have sadly since died since then, but all poets were living, because I wanted to be really a book about now and how we're dealing with this, not so much reach into the fabulous chestnuts of the past. So all these poems by people from different nations and different ethnic backgrounds sit side by side, just as we sit side by side on our beautiful planet, our beautiful hurting planet. So they live side by side, and sort of emphasizing that while marginalized communities suffer the most from the climate crisis, ultimately we're all in this together across geography and identity. So that's sort of the genesis for this. One of the things with poverty law is that I learned you never give up. The odds were always stacked against you. The landlord was always sort of, the law tended to favor the landlord. The law favored the person suing the poor person. It was just, we never had good odds. The judges, I was working in the South, and the judges never tended. There was a lot of sort of favoring and favoring and favoring, and you just never give up. You never give up. And that's what we try to bring to this book. And actually, this book also reflects that, because I was a little bit shy about my idea. And I sort of told one person, and they were like, yeah, that's a really good idea. And then I told another person, they were like, that's a really good idea. And I got braver and braver. And I sort of, when I went to Copper Canyon, they were excited about this book. And so it's been kind of this thrilling experience. And so that's, in a way, a model for, I think, how we need to speak out. And I decided that we should have someone write the foreword who reflected the bigness of this vision. And so I figured out I thought about it for a long time, and then I figured out a way that I could maybe connect through various people to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who wrote a beautiful foreword to the book. And then we had this idea to, because we wanted this book to spur action, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, we had this idea to have the Union of Concerned Scientists do an activist guide at the end. And they have done this magnificent activist guide, and I'm giving all my royalties from the book to the Union of Concerned Scientists, because I sort of wanted it to be a full service, a sort of fully integrated public interest project. And they have been lovely partners. So, and then the arc of the book has been very important to me, because I wanted to leave people, how do you sort of both realistically reflect the despair we all feel about what's going on, but give people hope. And I didn't want it to be kind of false, hallmarky hope, kind of, yay, everything's great. I wanted to really reflect the despair. But I organized it in a way that reflects this journey to despair and back. So let me tell you a little bit about that. So there are 5 sections to the book. And the first section, here it is. By the way, here's the book. There are little markers in where we're going to read things, but it's called Here Poems for the Planet, Copper Canyon Press, with a foreword from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which we're all very excited about. And so the first section of the book is where you'd want to come from, poems for our planet. So those are poems about the beauty of the earth and how magnificent it is. The second section is the gentle light that vanishes, our endangered world. And this is the section where we have the just sort of super just mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G poems about our despair. The third section is for the animals, third section is As If They'd Never Been, poems for the animals. And these are poems about animals and extinction. Some of them joyful about animals, but many of them about extinction. The fourth section is poems by young people, and it's called Oceans, the Ocean Within Them. And the fifth section, so what we've done is we've gone to despair about the beauty of the earth, to despair about the planet, to despair about the animals, to back, and now we're circling back towards hope with the voices of young people. And then the last section is called Like You Are New to the World, From Inspiration to Action. So you come out of it just feeling like, oh my gosh, we can do this, we're going to do it. And then but then you say, how do I do it? And then it goes right into a 24-page activist guide from the Union of Concerned Scientists. So that's the arc of the book. And let's see. And I want to reach people. So the poems are quote unquote accessible. We wanted to reach people whether they've turned to poetry in the past or not, because we didn't want this to be a book. I love all poetry. And I wanted the poems to be excellent, but also poems that people could read who maybe didn't normally turn to poetry. And I wanted to reach it whether they've, regardless of political affiliation. And in fact, Copper Canyon raised the funds and we sent a copy of this book to every member of Congress. The Copper Canyon did, which I'm very grateful for and proud of. And one member of Congress wrote back that she couldn't put it down. So we hope they'll use it. We hope it didn't get thrown out by some of them. I'm sure it did by some of them. But okay, so, and then we've got the activist guide from the Union of Concerned Scientists, which is a how-to guide. It's very practical. It's not pie in the sky. It's very simple. It sort of takes you through how to do all the activism. And it focuses on the idea that while obviously our individual choices are hugely important, like recycling and composting and reusing and not over purchasing, but also how we can amplify our voices is the most important thing. So how to, section 1, how to reach out to your representatives, calls, meeting, etc. 2, corporate activism, protests, etc., like the Dakota pipeline. Section 3, connecting with the media. Super hands-on, like how to write a letter to the editor, how to have a meeting with an editorial board, and in the reaching out to the representatives, how do you do emails, how do you make calls, how do you organize meetings, what you should raise at meetings, with examples. And then section 4 is finding our power in numbers, how we join with others on events. And this is kind of is finding our power in numbers to do what we're doing today. So, and then and the activist guide goes into a little bit some of the principles of how to create more energy efficiency in transportation and buildings and appliances, about getting more renewable energy or electricity from more renewable sources, limiting emission levels, and R&D to reduce further emissions. So it's a very practical and kind of easy to read and follow. And we can do it, we can read it, we can read the poems, and then we can be inspired and we can do it. And the idea is that even a tiny action taken by each of us can impact our world. So I feel like with this book, we've skipped a stone into the sea, we're continuing to skip it into the sea, and we hope it will ripple out into the future. And let's see, so we, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, if we have the capacity to destroy the earth, so too we have the capacity to protect it. So, and then the other thing is that this is kind of a journey. Participating in here, reading it, trying the activism is kind of a journey. So sometimes we're a little bit shy, like I was with this book. You're a little bit like, I don't know if I can do this, but you do the little thing. You write the letter to your congressperson. You get involved in composting, and you get braver and braver, and you keep trying more. So instead of just beating yourself up for everything you haven't done, and Lord knows there's a lot none of us have done, you try, and then you keep going, and you keep going, and you get braver and braver and do more and more. That's the idea. So that concludes part 1. And part 2, which would have been super interactive, and also the whole thing would have been interactive because we are going to hear a little bit about Paul and Kyle's ideas, but we would have heard more. And we're gonna, that part is a little bit limited. So that was part one. And part two is now kind of a little bit of a talk about ecopoetics, which we were gonna do with you, but just to give you some ideas. And then part three will be the readings. So part two, ecopoetics of climate change. I did we took here to Seattle Arts and Lectures. Copper Canyon, as you know, is from Port Townsend, Washington. So we had an event at Seattle Arts and Lectures, and the wonderful poets Kimiko Hahn and Francisco Dargan were both in here, did great readings. And then afterwards, I did a little session with them, a talking session, Q&A about here and about their practice. And these are some of the questions I asked them. And I thought I would sort of pose them with you, and then you could think about them if you want, and we can put them up in the little afterword. We'll put them up on the website for you so you can think about them some more. So in your practice, as you write eco poetry, do you see in it a greater conversation about the environment? And do you set out to write an eco poem and other socially engaged poetry? Does the issue lead the way? Does the goal lead the way? Or how do you find your way from inside the poem? And you'll hear, I think what I took from what Kimiko and Francisco said was that there's a kind of, you have to be thinking about it to write about it. You know, poetry, you set out to write something about a political issue or to write an op-ed, you have an idea. But here, it comes from your heart, it comes from your words, it comes from sound and feelings and images. And so it has to be inside you, I think, to come out. So I think where Kimiko and Francisco sort of ended up on this in part was that we need to spend more time thinking about this. If we spend more time thinking about this, we'll spend more time writing about it. The more we engage with something, I think the more we write about it. And it's a hard thing to engage with because it involves a lot of despair. So you have, and that's why one reason I'm excited about here, because it gives you a way into that. So what is the role of eco poetry was the second question. The first question I asked them was about their practice. The second question was about the role of eco poetry. And I had the same conversation with students at Pure of Manhattan Community College in a class of theirs that Cheryl Fish does a wonderful class on literature of the environment. I mean, it's just a brilliant class with these students, and they were wonderful. By that time, we were all in quarantine, self-quarantine, and so it was on Zoom, and their ideas were super interesting too, and hers. So what is the role of eco poetry? And Jory Graham was asked in an interview about eco poetry. She said, someone said to her, people know this information already, so why do they need it in a poem? And Graham answered, that is precisely the point. They know it, they are not feeling it. That is what activists in the environmental movement are asking of us. Help it to be felt, help it to be imagined. So do you agree with that? And what other roles might such poetry play? So it's sort of like what said better, but what I said at the beginning, that this is about feeling it, not about just hearing it. Parenthetically, I meant to say earlier that years ago, I heard a very famous environmental advocate, a great one, talking about the climate crisis and the hell we were headed towards. And he just told us the facts. And I couldn't metabolize it. I felt this despair. All I wanted to do was go eat a piece of chocolate cake. I could not. There was a piece of chocolate tape on a table for a reception later, and I just was like, I couldn't do it. And I realized that, I did do it, and I have tried to do it, and I do it, but poetry gave me a way in where it's not just about the facts, but about the feelings. So and what role do you see for, so environmental poets can help us feel, help it be imagined. And do you agree? And what other roles might such poetry play? What role do you see for poetry on the climate and environmental crisis and other issues of our time, social, economic, and racial justice? And how does eco poetry avoid being propaganda? One of my poetry teachers is a wonderful poet named Richard Jackson, and I was told that he said in a lecture, he talked about how you bring devastating loss and information to people in a poetry. And he gave the example of war. It doesn't serve to write that war is horrible. We know war is horrible. But instead, he said, you write about the hand you found in the street. And I think that's another way, that's a beautiful way to describe it, a beautiful and devastating way to describe it. So I just wanted to end with a few words from a couple of this section. I'm going to end section 2 with a couple of words from, before I end it, you'll hear when Kyle Dargan reads his amazing poem, he'll also talk a little bit about his process and how he connects, he sort of sneaks in this information in this really wonderful way from inside the poem, from juxtaposing 2 different privileges, from not making it propaganda, but from being totally open to the world, and then trying to show things in a different angle, sort of a very different lens. It's quite beautiful and hard to paraphrase, but listen carefully for what Kyle has to say about that. So again, from a poem about how we're all in this together, the Australian poet Mark Trednick said, wherever you are, the smell of rain coming or just gone is the smell of the same rain locally inflected. We all have the same climate locally inflected. And then in terms of hope, poet Lee Herrick writes in his amazing poem about New Orleans, like Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And he says at the end, I feel like the saints are marching. They are singing a slow, deep, and beautiful song, waiting for us to join in. So I encourage you all to join in. And so now I'm thrilled to introduce the readers. So we're going to have other readers from 4 of the sections, but unfortunately, because of circumstances, I don't have readers for the first section, but so I'm going to read for them. Then I'm going to do a little reading for people where we didn't have people, but I think that'll be okay. Good. So section 1, where you'd want to come from, poems for our planet. And I'm going to read the first poem in the book, Catherine Pierce's Beautiful Planet. Catherine Pierce is the writer of 3 books of poetry and a winner of the Pushcart Prize. She's from Mississippi, I believe. The second poem I'm going to read from the first section is Esmail Koy. His poem is translated from the Parsi by Nilufar Talebi. It's called Image of Kindness. And I'll read that. I'm sorry, her poem. In section 2, The Gentle Light That Vanishes, Our Endangered World, Kyle Dargan will read and also talk a little bit about eco poetry. He has 5 collections. He's the winner of the Cave Canem Prize and the Hearst Wright Legacy Award in Poetry. The second poem in that section, I'm going to read for Paul Guest. I'm going to talk a little for Paul, who is unwell, about his poem and his connection of that poem to climate change. It's quite interesting and beautiful. And I'm going to read what he wrote me about it. And Paul has written 3 collections. He won the New Issues Poetry Prize, the Prairie Schooner Book Prize, the Writing Writers Award, and has received a Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship. The third poem read from section 2 will be by Shara McCallum, the third person who is going to be with us today. And Shara is the author of 5 collections. She's won an NEA Fellowship, the Witter-Brunner Award, and an OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature for Poetry. Reading from section 3, As If They'd Never Been, Poems for the Animals, will be Rachel Eliza Griffiths. She'll read The Human Zoo. Rachel Eliza is a multimedia artist, poet, and writer. She's the winner of the 2012 inaugural Poetry Award by the Black Caucus of the American Library Association and a finalist for the 2015 Balcones Poetry Prize and 2016 Phyllis Wheatley Book Award in Poetry. And Jane Hirschfield will read her The Weighing. She's the author of 9 collections. She was longlisted for the National Book Award, finalist for the PEN USA Poetry Award, and the National Book Critics Circle Award. She's also an essayist and translator. Section 4, The Ocean Within Them, Voices of Young People. We're lucky to have Ryan P. Corey, who's now 9, read his Sparkle Rock, which he wrote when he was 8. He's an athletic, kind-hearted, and witty 4th grade student at Setauket Elementary on Long Island. Ryan loves all things outdoors and spends much of his time taking care of his pet chickens, training for track, and examining objects at the beach. He's also completed his first triathlon this year and Ryan hopes to become a scientist and work alongside his best friend, Anderson, and discover more about the universe. And we look forward to that, Ryan. I know it will help us all. And from section 5, Like You Are New to the World, From Inspiration to Action, I will read my poem that's in that section called On a Saturday in the Anthropocene. And Tracy Brimhall will read her poem Fledgling. Tracy's the author of 3 poetry collections. She's won the Barnard Women Poets Prize and a Crab Orchard Series in Poetry First Book Award, and she was a finalist for the Forward Book of the Year Award. And then we're going to end with a found poem that I wrote at Copper Canyon's request that sort of puts a number of the poems from the book together. From the whole many-page book, I wrote one teeny little poem, kind of a cento. And I also forgot the writing prompt. So before we get to the reading, I wanted to give you the writing prompt, so these poems will all appear as part of this. We'll have the echo poetry discussion. We will have the writing prompt. And the writing prompt is to take, and also the poems, you're going to have the poems themselves that were read. Take any line from any of the poems that were read today, that will be read today, and make them the first line of a poem. And then take any line from any of the poems that were read today and make them the last line of a poem. Could be the same poem, could be a different poem, could be similar, could be totally different. And then write a poem of at least 14 lines in between that first and last line. Then remove the first and last line and see what you got, and then work with that. And so thank you so much. If anyone wants to send me their poem versus via my website, elizabethjcoleman.com, that would be fun. And I just thought of that. And so now we're going to get to the readings. Thank you so much for bearing with me and us. And I hope you'll read and use Here Poems for the Planet. I hope you'll be inspired to take action and protect and save human life on this, to help protect and save human life on this extraordinary, gorgeous planet. As Frances Beinecke, a past president of the NRDC, said, it's her favorite planet, and it's mine too. Thank you so much. We'll see you in a minute with the poems. I'm going to read Catherine Pierce's Planet. This morning, this planet is covered by winds in blue. This morning, this planet glows with dustless, perfect light, enough that I can see 1,000,000 sharp leaves from where I stand. I walk on this planet. It's hard-packed dirt and prickling grass, and I don't fall off. I come down soft if I choose, hard if I choose. I never float away. Sometimes I want to be weightless on this planet, and so I wade into a brown river or dive through a wave, and for a while feel nothing under my feet. Sometimes I want to hear what it was like before the air, and so I duck under the water and listen to the muted hums. I'm ashamed to say that most days I forget this planet. That most days I think about dentist appointments and plagiarists and the various ways I can try to protect my body from itself. Last weekend, I saw Jupiter through a giant telescope, its storm stripes, 4 of its 67 moons, and was filled with fierce longing. Bitter that instead of Ganymede or Europa, I had only one moon floating in my sky. The moon called Moon, its face familiar and stale. But this morning, I stepped outside and the wind nearly knocked me down. This morning, I stepped outside and the blue nearly crushed me. This morning, this planet is so loud with itself, its winds, its insects, its crackles and mourning doves, that I can hardly hear my own lamentations. This planet, all its groove bark, all its sand of quartz and bones and volcanic glass, all its creeping thistle lacing the yards with spiny purple. I'm trying to come down soft today. I'm trying to see this place, even as I'm walking through it. And I'm going to read Esmail Khoi's poem, Image of Kindness. Learn from this tree. It offers its bountiful canopy of shade over your head. Rain or shine, no matter whence you came to it, and it never, not even out of innocent curiosity, sizes you up. Hey, stranger, where are you from?
Hello, my name is Kyle Dargan, and I'm reading for Here, Poems for the Planet, edited by Elizabeth Coleman, an important book from one of my favorite presses, which includes many remarkable writers I'm fortunate to be among. Um, I don't think that one can write with the intent of making change, but I think one can hope for it. I think if you're engaged in the process of making art, you have to be open to the fact that audiences may respond to it however they choose. That's what makes art different from propaganda for me. Um, but in order to write towards that possibility of making change, uh, I think one of the things that one has to do, I talk about this a lot with my students, is finding ways through the reader's defenses. I think many times we often walk out into the world with some kind of defense up to protect ourselves physically or rhetorically um, from penetration. And I think fiction does it in one way in terms of getting us to empathize with, characters, figures who are um, different from ourselves in some ways and like ourselves in others. Poetry, I think, has to find a way to juxtapose and mask the juxtaposition of ideas in a way that allows you to sort of slip in something that the reader might not have expected. Um, and that presents the possibility for change to occur in their minds. So this poem that I have in the book, titled Daily Conscription, it starts with an epigraph, a quote from James Baldwin, which is we can no longer afford that particular romance. Um, and Baldwin was talking about race and specifically whiteness in a speech he was giving at Berkeley. And I think for me, thinking about change and the planet and changing or the potential of changing people's awareness and perception of that, um, sometimes I find it useful to take one privilege and find a way to show how it relates to another privilege. And I think, as we can all see right now during this coronavirus, that things like race and class and gender, their weight brings particular leverage to the outcomes of these types of environmental and health crises. So thinking about race was also a way for me to go enter thinking about the environment and the current risk to the environment. And that was sort of where this poem began. So, daily conscription. Brother Ricky halts me before I cross East Capitol. He trumpets that we are at war. I want to admit that I don't believe in white in the manner that Baldwin did not. But Brother Ricky would simply retort that my disbelief is no immunity from the imaginations of those who think themselves white. As we await the stoplight shift, so I may walk and he may holler, "Final call!" between lanes of idle traffic, I think of race as something akin to climate change, a force we don't have to believe in for it to kill us. I once believed in the seasons. I fantasized fall as Brother Ricky's favorite, when his suits, boxy and plaid, would be neither too hot nor thin. But we are losing spring and fall, tripping from glaze to frost and back. And who's to say we won't soon shed another season, one of these remaining two, and live on either an earth of molten streets or one of frozen light? That's when worlds end, no? When, after we've eradicated ourselves, we become faint fossils to be exhumed by the curiosities of whichever life forms follow our reign. I still owe Brother Ricky $2 for the paper he last placed in my hand, calling me soldier. I don't have to believe that I am enlisted in order to understand that he'll forgive my debt, as long as this idea of whiteness soaries above us, ultraviolet, obliging an aseasonal, unending deployment. Released by the signal, I advance, my head down, straining to discern the crossfire from the cover.
Unfortunately, Paul Guest, who was part of our original team, couldn't be here today. So I'm going to read his poem, Post-Factual Love Poem, and also read you what Paul said about this poem. I was moved to write Post-Factual Love Poem after Donald Trump was elected president. I've always wondered about the efficacy of poetry in the world, about what good it could do or be, and his rise to power only exacerbated that unease. I remember asking my students that semester what they thought the value of the sublime was, not because I had any sense of the answer, but because I didn't. And I guess I still don't. But poems are ways to make sense of the world, to take life by the throat, to quote Frost. And in this poem, I wanted to take the measure of a world that was falling apart, was melting literally, and to preserve it, at least a little, in language. Post-Factual Love Poem by Paul Guest. I'm thinking of the boiling sea and the dream in which all the fish were singing. I want to wake up with my heart not aching like death, but I am always falling into terror. I'm a good person. I grieve to appropriate degrees. I mourn this season, this moment. I mourn for the polar bear drifting out of history on a wedge of melting ice, for the donut shop which reached an end yesterday after decades and decades. I'm thinking of the light at dawn, of the woman in Alabama who ordered 6 songbirds from a catalog because she was lonely or heartbroken. I'm thinking of the 4 that came dead in the box, mangled, of the 2 that are missing. I want to tell you that they were spotted in the humid air, winging above a mall. I want to tell you a story about the time leaves fell from the trees all at once. I am thinking about cataclysm more than anything. I want to tell you this. I want to disappear in the night. I want the night to vanish from memory. I want to tell you how this happened.
This is Shara, McCallum. Why mad women shouldn't read the news. I know you'll say I'm overreacting, but my mother's prophesying has come to pass. Armageddon is upon us. Just look at the evidence. The carriers of our species at every second being raped and killed, and the rare ones who survive offing their lovers and children, or worse if it can be believed, wearing bangs. Gun toters and molesters skulking in every lunchbox, the environment churning into apocalypse. Oh, kids, please save us the heartache and leave in advance. Calmly, but quickly, abandon your seesaws and swings. Friends, do you remember when we were young? Life plump with promise and dreams? Me neither. Anyway, who'd be naive enough now to believe in anything so impossible to attain as happiness or justice? Sure, we had a run of it, even some laughs. But the days arrived, as deep down we knew it would. And spectacles, streaming from across the globe, should convince even the most skeptical of our soon-to-be extinction. Not that we listen to true madmen anymore, but the older I get, the more certain I become. My father would have been heralded a prophet had he lived, would have joined his brethren and sistren on every street corner, trumpeting this end from the beginning.
Hi, I'm Rachel Eliza Griffiths, and this is my poem, The Human Zoo. The peacocks walk along the path between the black trees. They are mystics dripping with the restraint of beauty. They duck from our gaze, refuse our diamond alleluias, do not encourage touch, and we say they are free because they are not in cages. We are happy to repeat this. One male turns his head. The civil crest trembles at our approach. His train of eyes opens like a tree. Unblinking in the face of our overture, he does not admire his emerald blue life during visiting hours. He does not hide his lack of interest.
I'm Jane Hirschfield. This poem is called The Weighing, and that's a little hard to hear, so I mean weighing as a scale does. And it's a poem that was written during a very dark and hard time in my life. The Weighing. The heart's reasons seen clearly, even the hardest will carry its whip marks and sadness and must be forgiven. As the drought-starved eland forgives the drought-starved lion who finally takes her, enters willingly then the life she cannot refuse, and is lion, is fed, and does not remember the other. So few grains of happiness measured against all the dark, and still the scales balance. The world asks of us only the strength we have, and we give it. Then it asks more, and we give it.
Sparkle Rock. The spikes sparkle in the way of the sun. The spikes sparkle on the logs. The logs are in the way of the water. The water is calm. The rocks might wobble. Ducks come in and squawk. Let's all shout water.
And I'm going to read my poem from here, Poems for the Planet, on a Saturday in the Anthropocene. On a Saturday in the Anthropocene, as I walk in the light of a two-rivered island to my post office, I mourn. The last typewriter repair shop in New York going out of business. Mourn that this moves us further from letters, from connection, from writing home. I mourn that it's so warm, Monk Parrot's nest in Sheepshead Bay. Lovely as that sight is. Mourn what we've done to birds. For 150 million years, they saw their reflections only in the sea. Then I notice a fire escape on a 2-century-old building casts a lovely shadow. I see wheels on a bicycle that, like meditation, seem to slow time. I remember gorillas stay up all night to groom their dead, and reading about a woman in Ohio who gave every building in town a new coat of paint after she was laid off. At my post office, endangered too, I avoid the self-service kiosks, wait in line for a human. A clerk waves me over with her smile, asks where I've been. She tells me about a cruise she's taken with her mother, describes the buffets, the turquoise of the ship's pool. Now I'm smiling too. What's your name? I've been meaning to ask for ages. Grace, she says. I thought you knew.
This is fledgling. I scare away rabbits stripping the strawberries in the garden, ripened ovaries reddening their mouths. You take down the hanging basket and show it to our son. A nest, secret as a heart, throbbing between flowers. Look, but don't touch, you instruct our son who has already begun to reach for the black globes of the new bird's eyes, wanting to touch the world, to know it. Disappointed, you say, common house finch, as if even banal miracles aren't still pink and blind and heaving with life. When the cat your ex-wife gave you died, I was grateful. I'd never seen a man grieve like that for an animal. I held you like a victory, embarrassed and relieved that this was how you loved, to the bone of you, to the meat. And we want the stricken pleasure of intimacy, so we risk it, we do. Every day we take down the basket and prove it to our son. Just look at its rawness, its tenderness, it's almost flying.
And I'm going to read a found poem or cento I wrote for here using some of the voices in the book, including Amy Nezhukumatatil, Catherine Pierce, Patty Ann Rogers, Kwame Dawes, and Mark Doty. Here, listen how this planet spins with so much fin, wing, and fur, so loud with itself. Not a voice, not a message, but something like a lingering. A reggae bass line finding its melody in the mellow of the soft earth's breath. What did you think? That joy was some slight thing?